Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's PDP event. My name is Jacob Wassel, and I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Sean Maxwell. Sean currently serves as the Chief Commercial Officer at Absolute Software, a publicly traded endpoint security and data risk management solutions company. Sean oversees the broad leadership of all commercial activities for Absolute's global operating markets, including global sales. He is a high-performing information security executive with a proven track record in leading effective global enterprise sales teams. His experience spans large enterprise corporations, as well as technology startups within the Americas, Asia Pacific, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Prior to Absolute, Sean was Vice President of Global Sales Strategy and Field Enablement at Symantec, responsible for global sales and go-to-market strategy. Prior to his work at Symantec, Sean held leadership roles with Virtual Instruments and EMC. Today, Sean will be discussing career pathing, how to position yourself for long-term success. He has been strategic and intentional about positioning himself for long-term success and is passionate about helping others do the same. Thank you for joining us today, Sean.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for the invitation to spend a little bit of time with the fine young men and women of Baylor and your business school. I was excited, Jacob, to get your invitation and actually look back on my 30-plus year career and try to distill that down to about 10 or so different slides or thoughts. So career pathing was something really for me that I've given a lot of thought to over my career. And I don't have the most standard career, if you will. In fact, when I talk to folks about my history and what I've been doing over my 3+ decades, it just is atypical. Many folks get on a single career path and stay on that path for their entire career, meaning in a single industry, kind of in a single function. And I've had an opportunity actually at a kind of a critical point of my career to make a big decision and actually leave the industry in which I started and start in an entirely new industry. And I did it actually right in the middle of the dot-com bubble burst, which was back in about the year 2000. And I'll say just a couple of words about it. CPG is where I began. That was out of university. And I had an opportunity in Southern California to work for Nestle, which is the world's largest food and beverage company, terrific company. From there, I went to Coca-Cola, company many of you have probably heard of. And then a move brought me back to Northern California, which is where I live now, working for Clorox. So these were all big global multinational companies. And I actually had the opportunity, because of that, to run $1 billion business in my early 30s as a general manager. And it was a great experience. And the reason I loved CPG, it's a 100-plus-year-old industry, very conservative, but they really invested in me as a young business professional about really how to do my job, how to interface cross-functionally inside of large companies, make decisions. And I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity. But there was always a bit of an itch that I could not scratch. And I'll talk more about it in a couple of minutes. But it was really the culture of consumer packaged goods that really left me longing. And the reason that is I was kind of in the hotbed of technology, in the hotbed of Silicon Valley, when a number of my colleagues were leaving CPG and going into tech, which is what I ended up having an opportunity to do. And I've really never looked back. And what's interesting is, and the lesson I just would share with each of you is, you're going to have an opportunity to interview with a lot of companies, hopefully, as you're starting your career. And you want to be as thoughtful and intentional as you possibly can about not only the company itself and its culture, but the nature of the industry. And the only example I would give you here, given my 3-decade-plus career, is that consumer packaged goods, which is a tremendously excellent industry from a training perspective. It's conservative. It's 100 years old. It's slow growth. And for me, the other path, which is the one I'm on currently, is high tech. It's like the wild, wild west. There's far less rules. It's a hyper-growth industry, and there's lots of other opportunities. So there might be a lot of companies that you may not have ever seen there on the right side of the slide, but all have created an incredible growth opportunity for me in my career and an opportunity to apply all the things that I learned earlier on in the younger days when I was working for these big companies. So part of career pathing, a really, really important part, is actually getting into the career. And that first big step, which many of you are already considering, maybe having some experience in, is interviewing. It's going to be a critical part of your career. Even after you have a job, you may be interviewing for another job inside the company or competing with others. I do think about it like a funnel, like a sales funnel or a forecast funnel. I really think about it as an interview funnel. And as a young person looking for your first job out of university, you might be competing with 100 others for a single opportunity, maybe even in an internship. And if you put yourself in that perspective, you know how seriously you have to take it. And I personally conduct between 5 and 10 interviews a week hiring into my company. And for every single person that we hire, and I teach this to all of my managers worldwide, every single person that we bring into the organization is a big deal. They're going to contribute to the culture, they're going to contribute to the success, and they need to be additive to the organization. But I want my managers and for myself to be looking from a pool of at least 100. So how do you find 100 people? How would you be in a pack of 100 others? Well, it's networking, certainly with the people that you know. It's the programs and the opportunities that Baylor is going to provide for you. It's LinkedIn. I spend time every morning, afternoon, and evening in LinkedIn as a hiring manager. You should as well, as someone who's going to be entering the workplace. But you've got to consider by the time you get to the interview, the actual interview portion, even if it's a scoping interview, there's probably 100 people just like you that have been looked at online. So your LinkedIn presence is critically important. You know, how you're dressed, you know, what kind of experience you had, you know, through university, how much you applied yourself. And then ultimately, when you get to that interview, I'm typically screening between 10 and 20 people for very brief interview screens, kind of down selecting to where I have 1 or 2 or 3 candidates that I'm very serious about. By that time, I have an interview panel of people that are going to be interviewing the person for me. And by the time somebody joins my organization, they've been through anywhere between 10 and 15 interviews. And that person needs to be incredibly prepared. So again, put yourself in the seat of the interviewee. You've got to capture the attention of every person you speak with in every moment. So that first 30 seconds is critical. You'll either kind of get somebody switched on or switched off in that first 30 seconds. You've got to be engaged through the entire interview, ask great questions, close the interview certainly with an ask of the person, which is, what's the next steps? Have I answered all your questions? And the other thing that many candidates don't do is research the company that they're actually interviewing with, researching and profiling every person that they're going to speak to. Look for commonalities in LinkedIn, in where you grew up, what school you went to. They're all very commonsensical topics, but you would be surprised at 90+% of the people that I speak to don't actually cover the basics. So kind of that minimum entry here is the 10% that most people aren't covering. Those people really stand out to me. And I borrowed a term from a great movie, but it's ABC, always be closing. So make sure that there's a next step or an action item in the interview process. And when you get to that last part of the funnel, you have an opportunity to become number one by surviving the interview gauntlet. So another really, really critical part of career pathing, and this, again, isn't something that just happens one time and then you're done. And I'm sure you've had an opportunity to learn a lot and hear the term network. You know, networking for me is something that I do very actively in my career, even this far into my career. And that is networking with other people that have common interests, both on a career and a personal side. It's, you know, I was interviewing somebody last week to run my European theater. I like this individual a lot. And so I look for common people in our network to reach out and give me a personal reference. Again, back to that interview funnel. Your network, and the wider you can make your network, is an important part of it, because somebody is going to back channel you once you're through that interview funnel that is in your network, and they're going to ask about you. And I've said for many years, your reputation arrives in the room long before you ever do. And what that means is people like you and people like me are looking for the best possible talent in their company. And so they're going to work through their network. So really apply yourself. And I talk to all of my employees and people that are in my network about the importance of tools like LinkedIn, living inside LinkedIn on a daily basis and getting to know people and connecting. I think I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 or 5,000 connections now in LinkedIn. And I don't know all of them personally or firsthand, but these are people that if I am looking to hire, if I'm looking to expand in new marketplaces, as I'm looking to grow my company, I'm constantly going back to that network. So lean on and leverage the network that Baylor provides. Lean on and leverage people that you know in your personal network that are very, very good at professionally networking. There's always opportunities to go out for, post-COVID, of course, to go out to different dinners or cocktail hours or things like that. Once you're in your career, an opportunity to meet other people in the customer or partner community. Take advantage of that. Be very intentional, once a week or once a month to intentionally expand your network. The other side of that, and it's, some people kind of replace this idea of a mentor versus a network. A network you don't have to have permission to gain. So that's just something you're going to work at. A mentor, on the other hand, you actually need permission and give permission either to make a mentor or to be a mentor. And at this point of your career, each of you should have at least one mentor. And a mentor doesn't have to be a person that's been around for 3+ decades like me, but could be somebody that's 1 or 2 or 3 years ahead of you on their career path, but it could be somebody who's been around for a long time. It could be somebody that is in the industry in which you want to work. It could be somebody that's in a company that really attracts you that you want to go to work in and may not work in the same function that you'll be working in. But a mentor is somebody who you have a connection with and that you feel very comfortable around, that you could speak very candidly with, and somebody that you can ask the tough questions. And ultimately, when you call or text, it's somebody that's going to have time for you. So culture. So it's a word you probably have heard many, many times. You will continue to hear many, many times. When I was coming out of university, I really didn't understand what it meant by company culture. All I knew was I needed to go get a job. So I interviewed across industries, I interviewed across companies, and what the company did and how they did it at the time was of much less importance as was that they just wanted to hire me. And I think that was my naivete and inexperience at the time. Over time, company culture has become critically important to me. And so as I mentioned when I started, there's a lot of big companies I work for, and I really feel blessed to have had those opportunities. Some of the closest personal friends I have today in life were colleagues that I worked with back in the day. But for me, at this point in time in my career, I actually want to work in a smaller company. However, I wouldn't have gotten the experience that I have now had I started in that small company. But again, the culture, and that is what the company does for a living, what industry they're in. Read lots and lots of articles about what other people are saying, business analysts, financial analysts. Read about what the company is doing socially, incredibly important for what a company chooses to do with the profits they're making. And then find those companies culturally that really attract you. So for me, I really enjoyed working for companies like Coca-Cola early in my career because they were a big brand name, super high ethic company, and they do things for good around the world. And that has always drawn me for those types of companies that really spend their time and their money developing people, but also developing people to do something outside of work that's really good for the world. So the next one, I'm sure everybody has heard about the company ladder and climbing the company ladder. And so my title of what I was talking about today is career pathing, and it's how to move kind of from the first rung of the ladder all the way to the corner office. And many of you will endeavor to do that. Many of you may not endeavor to get to the top of that corporate ladder. But as I think about the company ladder and I think about my career in the sales function, that ladder is rather narrow and in some cases can be really, really steep, which means you've got to kind of climb over some folks to get to the top. And that's not always easy and it's not always fun. And when you think about the company ladder, that is only one way to the top. What I've learned through my career, and I just kind of think of it as a scaffold. And what I mean by that is I've had an opportunity, again, I think because of having great mentors and having a really good network, is I've had an opportunity to do other things, maybe moving sideways instead of straight up. And a couple examples I can give you is I was working in a big technology company that was going through a terrible downturn in the early 2000s. And a lot of people were getting laid off and reductions in force. And there was 15 different reductions in force in a single month. And so I was hired to do a job as a sales leader where there were 16 other people just like me, just in Northern California, but I was the newest guy on the ladder. And they offered me an opportunity to go do something in a different part of the organization, which is not something I ever would have signed up to do if I was coming to that company for the very first time. However, I accepted it gladly because of the economic times that we're going through at the time, and ended up learning a lot of things that I otherwise never would have learned. And so once the economy kicked back in and the company began to grow, it was because of that experience that I had outside of the normal sales function that actually helped me get to the next step up the ladder or up the scaffold, and actually really has helped me through my career. So I've kept that in mind. So while I love meeting with customers and meeting with partners, I love leading sales organizations. I've had opportunities to be in a channel sales organization, to be in marketing organizations, to do operational roles inside of a company. And when that opportunity has been right for me and for my family, I've leapt at it and known that over the course of that 1 year, it's going to better prepare me cross-functionally and experientially to do that next job when there's more responsibility. So what nice talk like this would be complete without Homer Simpson? I thought I'd share a really fun story that I heard from my pastor in church about 6 or 8 months ago. And he was sharing a story of a close confidant and friend of his. And he was saying there's really 3 things that were really important about getting promoted once you're in a company. Number 1, very simply, show up to work on time. Number 2, do your job, pretty simple. And number 3, which got a really big laugh from everybody in church that Sunday, was don't steal anything from the office. So all really, really practical, commonsensical pieces of advice. And the reason he was sharing it is there's a lot of people that just can't do the basics, unfortunately. But if you build out the slide, as I think about my career and advice that I've gotten from great mentors and people that I've observed that have gotten promoted regularly and things that have worked for me, is number 1, you've got to have somebody that's advocating, or somebody that's advocating for you in your career. In a highly competitive organization, especially in big companies, you might be prone to advocate for yourself. So if you've been given an opportunity, if you're a salesperson and you have a quota, if you have different KPIs, key performance indicators that you need to accomplish, and you've accomplished those, your first response might be to let others know that you've done it. And that's a human nature, human response, but that doesn't always bode well for you. If you have mentors or you have other people in the organization that know that you've done it, trust and rely on the fact that they're going to advocate for you. The other thing that you can do for yourself, however, is if there's projects that are going on in the workplace, step up and be a leader in that project. Lead humbly, be a servant leader, meaning put other people's success ahead of your own, but definitely lead. And even if you're a reluctant leader and that's not your nature, I'd been described early in my career as a reluctant leader, meaning I kind of listened to what everybody else said. And at some point in time, I kind of got voted to the front, and I had an opportunity to lead as humbly as I possibly could. But that really gave me an opportunity and for others to observe my management or leadership capabilities. And then the last one, and again, it's a simple one, just like the ones on the left side of the ledger, make commitments. So tell folks that you work with and in the job, the things that you're going to do, and then go do them. You'd be surprised at the number of folks that kind of talk and would say the things that need to be done and that they're going to do, but they may not make those or keep those commitments that they make. So these are little things, but if you focus on these things during the interview process and earlier on in your career, it's going to bode very, very well for you. So there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to walk you through all of it, but the net of it is have a written plan for your success. So this is something that I learned really, really early on in my career. And this was part of working for a really well-run consumer packaged goods company. I learned this at Clorox when I had that opportunity to run $1 billion business early in my 30s. But part of their management process was having an interlocking business plan. This example of a plan is called an OGST. It's an acronym. It stands for objectives, goals, strategies, and tactics. But I learned this approach, and objectives are quantitative measures, and qualitative measures and statements. So it's an aspirational statement. And an objective statement is what you want to be when you grow up. You can do these personally, you can do these professionally. When you're in your job, you can do it for your exact job, you could do it for a business function. But having a qualitative statement about who you want to be when you grow up, what you want to do in the company that you're in. The goals are quantitative in nature, and they're very, very measurable. And in this example that I gave, and it's a couple of years old, but I do a new one every single year for every company that I've been in over 20 years. And then the strategies are those things that you will do on a day in, day out basis, again, qualitative, where you'll lean on other people, other parts of your company, maybe other people in the industry to be successful. And then the tactics, although I don't have them detailed in this graphic, are the things that you will wake up every single day and do. These are those commitments that I had talked about and have other people do on your behalf to help you achieve. When everything is worked out in a written plan for success, you actually achieve your quantitative goals. And because you're achieving your quantitative goals, you're going to achieve your qualitative objective, whatever that objective is. I, with my wife and family, have created one of these for my own retirement and what we want to be when we grow up and have an opportunity to retire. But it's an objective statement, how you will serve in your community, how you will serve inside your church, how you will serve inside your company. They're all really important things. But the other real benefit for having a written plan like this, and by the way, it can be wrong, it can be changed, but once you have it written down, you have a chance to reflect upon it. You can share it with other people. Remember that mentor that we had talked about? They'll want to be able to weigh in and kind of help nudge you along the way if you're getting off the plan that they think as you're seeking their counsel. But have a written plan, however simple it is, and reflect on it on a regular basis. One of the last things I'll talk about, and that is intentionality. So Jacob mentioned it when he was doing his intro to me, and Jacob, I think you're spot on. This is something I reflect on daily. So when I wake up and I look at my day and my week and my month and ultimately my quarter, I live in a very quarterly driven world because I work for a publicly traded company that reports our earnings and our revenue. And so part of having a plan, and this is an example that I call the absolute sales excellence wheel. As I joined this company about 5 years ago, and I brought a fair amount of experience into this company and an experience what worked for me and worked for my sales teams and other companies. But once I learned more about this company, Absolute, this endpoint security company, I began to observe what it really took to be successful and what our top performers needed to do. And again, I won't bring you through the entire wheel here, but these are just examples that I began to share with the people in my sales organization. Number one was understanding the story of the company that you work with and being able to tell it in a very compelling fashion so that people want to listen. Productivity, again, having written goals about how many sales calls we're going to make on a daily basis and how many follow-up calls we'll be making and on and on. But these were the things in my industry and with my customers and my partners that if people could master these 10 things, intentionally, they would achieve excellence. They would make their number. They would get to go on, fun sales trips and bring their family, and they would have career success. But when you get to the company that you were meant to land in, find out what the most successful people are doing. Find out what tools they're using. Find out how they spend their time. Ask them lots of questions. And if the company actually isn't detailing this for you, come up with your own type of excellence wheel and figure out what you need to be doing on a day in, week out basis to be a top performer in your company. Trust me, it works. And I'll kind of change the path here outside of just kind of what to do on a daily basis and really talk more about character. And this is, again, something that I kind of learned, over time. I didn't go into my first company thinking a lot about what type of character I had, but listen for how people describe you. Already, your closest friends at Baylor University can describe you. Your family back home can describe you. Take a moment and ask them, how would they describe your character? How would they describe your traits? And remember, when I talked about culture, when you're looking for companies, find out what type of traits they typify and look for a connection. So, are you a super high energy person? Well, if you are, you might not want to work in a kind of a slower growth industry. You might want to work in a high growth industry. If you have an ability to listen, if you're competitive, if you're just really hungry, think about that with regard to the role that you will do in that organization. And again, if you're going down a business path and you're going to pick a sales or a finance or an operational path, try to match your character traits to the role that you're interviewing for and look for what the roles and responsibilities and how they marry. And when you're back to the first one we talked about, when you're in that interview funnel and there's 100 other people that are really excited about the same job that you're excited, talk about how your character traits and the culture of the company that we had talked about are going to map to the job that is open. Those kind of connections, that identity that you're helping the interviewee connect to, is really going to help you. And it's going to kind of make that unspoken connection and make you stand out in the crowd, which is what you want to do early on in your career. And I'll finish with a word that has just really served me well. And I'll give an example. When I had left, this is in technology, so this is probably 15 years ago. I worked for a big company, big data storage company called EMC. They're now owned by this little tech company down in Round Rock, just south of where you guys are all at now, called Dell. Well, EMC was a really competitive, really aggressive company. And I had left that company to work for a smaller company. I was recruited back a number of years later. And when I sat down with my management team, so I was taking on about a $100 million business that was underperforming. And I had 5 or 6 direct reports that were managers. And it was going to be about 100 or so people in my organization. I wanted people to be very clear on who I was and why I was back and what I stood for. And so I wrote one word on the whiteboard, and then we went around the room and we talked about that word. It was ethic. And I began to illustrate, my work ethic, and that is getting up early in the morning and working hard all day long. And I'm not the brightest guy, but I would be the hardest working guy. And I wanted to let everybody know that work ethic to me was incredibly important. The other part of ethic that was really important to me was business ethic. And business ethic is, a mentor once described to me, it's not being, found in the Wall Street Journal or on the, cover of your local newspaper for having done something wrong in business. It's actually doing things that are right, even when people aren't asking you to, or even when no one's looking. Your business ethic is how you are treating your customers, how you're treating your business partners. It ultimately is a golden rule. You would do unto others as they would do unto you. And you've really got to think about that in work every day, because unfortunately not everybody will show up at work thinking the same way. So being very overt and very concrete about your business ethics, especially as a young person joining the workforce, you're going to stand out. You just will. And that's going to be a great thing to stand out for. And then the last one, you don't need me to preach to you about personal ethics. You go attend a tremendous university with unbelievable ethics. And I just really commend you for your choice in Baylor. And very blessed to be graduating soon from Baylor and joining the workforce with that on your resume. But your personal ethic in the workplace can be your identity. And what a great identity it will have. And this is how you treat your colleagues, your friends, your family, of course, but how you treat your work colleagues. And if you're known for having a dynamic and outstanding personal ethic, boy, oh boy, I just can't imagine a better thing that people would describe you. And remember the message I left you earlier, that your reputation arrives in the room before you ever do. Somebody's going to pick up the phone and ask about you because you're interviewing and you stood out in a crowd and you made a connection. And so they're going to reach out to the network and they're going to ask about you. And when they do, this is the word that you want used, I would think, about who you are and what you would do when you go to work for that company. So that's how I'll end my prepared comments, Jacob. And I think you might have a couple of questions for me, but I just want to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to kind of reflect back on my career and maybe share a lesson or two with some of your colleagues there at Baylor University.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was extremely encouraging hearing, about your career path and how it wasn't exactly the straight, typical ladder. But I have gathered a couple questions from my colleagues that they were interested in asking about you. So I'll start off by asking, how have you managed walking the line between staying in a role or department that you're comfortable with and have been successful with versus taking on a new role that might bring about a lot of risk?
Yeah. Well, I think about that. It's such a great question. I think about that both, inside an organization as I was growing my career, and being honest, I was thinking, how do I climb that ladder as quickly as I can? I was not born with a lot of patience. I can tell you, and so trying to be pragmatic and trying to be patient and trying to lean on the advice of others and the things I talked about, listening to your mentor. It's a really critical part of it. But I think the nature of your question also is, at what point in time, if there's an attractive opportunity outside of the company that you work in, do you actually roll the dice and take on some risk? Well, I can't give a lot of advice because I'm a bit of a risk taker. You may not be. So if you're not a risk taker, just be very careful about moving on or outside of your company, because I have people every week, I would say, Jacob, that come to me in my organization and say, I'm being recruited to another company. What do you think? And I'm very blessed that somebody would stop and ask me, about that. And I think about equity, and I tell them, you have a tremendous brand equity inside this company. You've earned that. And so if you were to go to another company, can they offer all the things that you like about the company you work for today? Would you be able to reestablish that equity inside that new organization? Would you have somebody that would champion you inside that new organization? So, my advice would be, don't be impetuous. Really do your due diligence. And then if you feel that everything's right, pray on it. And then you can make that leap.
Absolutely. And you mentioned equity. How have you managed to, manage your personal equity, your personal brand in such an evolving industry and even across multiple industries? How have you done that so successfully?
Well, yeah, it's such a good question. I just think through the things that we had talked about, Jacob, which is, determining what you stand for and what's your brand and where your line is, and not crossing that line, both personally and professionally. Surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded, certainly. And that, again, is back to culture, finding a culture you feel really comfortable in.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. One last question before we wrap up. One of my colleagues asked, how would you suppose that we can best break into an industry like technology, where us business students may have no background in technology or healthcare or whatever the industry is? How do we go about trying to break into such an industry?
That is a great question. And it's, I just think back to when I started. It's a little bit scary, isn't it? There's more unknowns than there are knowns. So first and foremost, you kind of own the path that you're on. So apply yourself. Do a lot of due diligence. Read a lot. There's so much content that's out there today, on the internet and YouTube and Glassdoor. I mean, there's just so many amazing references. LinkedIn that I mentioned earlier. just really understand that this is a critically important decision for you personally, professionally, financially. It will have long, standing impact on what you do next and how you do it. So just take your time, do a lot of research into all the things that we talked about: company culture, their financial wherewithal, who are the people that work there, how long have they been there, and just be ultra intentional as you get into it. And, for me, leaving consumer packaged goods and going into technology, the stories that I heard about tech, it was like the Wild West, Wild West. And, instead of in consumer packaged goods, in the business that I was in, instead of there being 3 companies, in cybersecurity today, there are 3,000 companies. It's mind numbing. And there's more every day. I like that. It just fits my personality really well. So find something, I would say, that kind of turns your prop, gets you energized. Find those things that just kind of intrigue you and spark your curiosity. It's a very natural response. You're probably on the right path.
Definitely. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. We're so excited that you were able to share some of that information with our students. I know that it will definitely not be taken lightly and will be extremely valuable for students like myself when we're trying to navigate these internship decisions and full-time decisions. So thank you again for joining us. We're super thankful to have you.
Well, I would thank you, Jacob. I would be remiss. My daughter's a Baylor grad, and on her behalf, I say sick 'em.
Awesome.
Jacob, thank you, and good luck to everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.